So today I have an absolute bombshell. The videos I will play in this report were sent to me by a student at the University of Miami. This person informed me that their professor was an avowed Marxist that claimed that Trump was not only a Nazi, but also an admirer of Adolf Hitler. The recordings are just the most bizarre things I've ever heard, and if there was any doubt that the reason students are leaving universities radically changing their beliefs, I hope this solves that doubt. Before we begin, please make sure to drop a follow and hit the bell next to my name so that you're up to date with my future videos. My YouTube was just banned yesterday, and years of building went out the window, so now I'm here on Rumble. Professor George A. Gonzalez of Politics, Society, and Popular Culture at the University of Miami teaches his students that Star Trek is a, quote, unambiguous philosophical text.
Star Trek is a full-fledged, unambiguous philosophical text.
That Trump wants to use the Proud Boys as a military force to Nazify the government, and that the modern Enlightenment came from Karl Marx, the founder of communism. He also forces his students to buy his own books on Star Trek and the Enlightenment, marked up hundreds of dollars, which is rich from a Marxist. I reached out to Mr. Gonzalez for comment, but received no callback. I'm just wondering honestly how this guy even has a job. On to the first clip.
So it's not, there's racism standalone, there's sexism standalone, there's homophobia standalone, right? Of course, these are all intertwined, and they're all intertwined within the broader framework of anti-communism. In order to keep the country free, in order to keep the country on a foundation of integrity, you have to repress African Americans, you have to repress women, you have to repress gays and lesbians. That was the anti-communist argument.
So he claims that the, quote, anti-communist argument, because again, he is a communist, is based on instituting racism, sexism, and homophobia. You know, it has nothing to do with the fact that communists are unable to calculate the value of labor, or goods, or the demand for those things, and it has nothing to do with every communist society devolving into an elite governing hierarchy with the majority of the country living in abject poverty, the inherent lack of incentive to prosper, or the patent unfairness. No, capitalists just hate black people.
So again, I emphasize lynchings again. And so the African Americans are horribly discriminated against, right? So to say, make America great again with the 1920s and 50s, again, think of the cynicism, think of the fantasy, the bullshit that represents. And this is what the movement behind Donald Trump really articulates, right? The bullshit of anti-communism, the bullshit of patriotism, the bullshit of racism, right? Because none of it is rooted in reality. It's just rooted in dark, repressive bias.
So right here, he's making the classic argument, well, make America great again. Well, when was America great? There were great things about the 50s and 60s. Lots of progress was made in that era with respect to race and sex. But moreover, the post-World War II era of the United States was one of incredible economic prosperity, mobilization, and innovation. You can point to an era and acknowledge that there were bad aspects of that era while also acknowledging the good and wanting to return to those good parts while leaving the bad in the past. But we don't even need to go that far, because when Donald Trump says make America great again, he doesn't specify what era he's referring to. It might be the 50s or 60s, or it might be the 80s or 90s.
Right. Donald Trump lies, is a serial inveterate liar. He does not care about the truth. Adolf Hitler was an inveterate serial liar. He did not care about the truth.
So Adolf Hitler was a serial liar and Trump is a serial liar. He's not, but let's for a moment just assume that's true. That must mean that Trump equals Hitler, right? According to George A. Gonzalez, yes. Hitler also loved to paint, and Bob Ross also liked to paint. Are Bob Ross and Adolf Hitler remotely similar ideologically in any way, shape, or form? Probably not.
There are very definite indications that Donald Trump admires Adolf Hitler. But what Donald Trump would love, what he's really going for in the immediate term, is an essay. He wants the Proud Boys to have a membership of 10 million. So he can use that population to terrorize people, right? So when we think of the Nazi revolution, really what it really means in practice is that all these millions of SA fanatics, racists, hate mongers, thugs, they were incorporated into the Nazi state. And so they acted under the color of authority. They victimized people under the color of authority, right? And so this is what Trump wants to do. Trump wants to basically Nazify the state. And of course, the first step in that is mobilizing, again, these far-right elements.
So we've gone from terrible argument to straight-up fairy tale land. When has Trump ever claimed that he wanted to increase the membership of the Proud Boys to 10 million to Nazify the government? The information for this argument was pulled out of thin air. It's based on nothing and has zero merit. And he's not teaching this to his YouTube channel or his friends. This is in a college where he is employed as a professor. He's speaking to young, impressionable people.
So Trump, again, this notion of tribe, this notion of division. Trump says, I will always put America first. He said that to the UN, interestingly enough. He said that to the UN, a body committed to global solidarity and working together to solve the world's problems. When he says something that I reject, now he speaks openly of railing against globalists, right?
So he seems to imply that Trump just hates the rest of the world because he said at the UN that he will always put America first. He was, at this time, the president of the United States. His primary purpose in his position as the executive leader of the United States is to care for the American people first and the rest of the world second. Interestingly enough, most of us would probably reject global collectivism and global governments. This guy seems to make the massive stretch that this is also what Trump believes, which based, and then complains about his own non-sequitur conclusion.
So Donald Trump, he rails against globalists, and for good reason. People will say that's what's a code word for Jews, because Jews have always falsely been conveyed as lacking a loyalty to the state.
So now globalist is a code word for Jews? His daughter is married to a Jew. Trump supports Israel vehemently. Now we're going to label him as anti-Semitic because he said at the UN that he'll always put America first, and we made a non-sequitur conclusion, which was a hop, skip, and a leap from what he actually said. That he apparently hates the UN, but only because he's anti-Semitic. All in an attempt to liken him to Adolf Hitler in front of college students. I would like to re-emphasize that this is being taught in a classroom by a salaried professor.
Yeah. Well, that's what I talk about there. I said, look, ultimately, the real question before us is the means of production going to be used to enrich the billionaire class? So yes, in a context of neoliberal capitalism and the race to the bottom, right, the means of production is used at the expense of the public, right? Well, yes, there's deindustrialization and economic displacement to use slave labor. You're right. That's absolutely the case. That's absolutely the case.
Foreign countries, not here.
Well, regardless, what does it matter? I'm going to overlook that language because we're talking about human beings here.
So that's just more communist BS. Capitalism bad because capitalism uses child slave labor, even though with the global rise of capitalism in the mid-1850s, child labor has significantly decreased all around the world. Why? Because capitalism creates better material outcomes for people, and those people are then less likely to send their children to work. And then there's the part where he said, well, it doesn't really matter if it doesn't happen in America, it still happens. It absolutely does matter. The countries with the highest rates of child labor are countries that are either structurally destabilized or formerly or currently socialist states. North Korea, Venezuela, Vietnam, Ukraine, Laos, Belarus, the list goes on.
What's the point of sovereign, independent nations if
there really is no point to it? It only serves the billionaire class to have sovereign independence.
Yeah, I just don't even have words for this one. A salaried professor at an academic institution was just asked, based on your argument, what's the point of independent nations? And he replied by instructing them that there really is no point to independent countries. This is exactly why your kids go to college and come home with all their hair chopped off, big huge nose rings, and the hammer and sickle tattooed on their foreheads. And this is happening in Florida, of all places. Imagine what it's like at the University of California institutions.
But that's not the job of the President of the United States.
Of course it is. Of course it's the job of the President. It's the job of the President because in promoting the living standards from across the world, right, you are also incorporating the United States in that.
So this was in reference to the UN America First stuff. A student says, but taking after the rest of the world is not the job of the president. And he replies by saying, of course it is. You could argue that presidents have made it their job to look after the rest of the world, and I agree and disagree with those actions to varying degrees, but the president's sole purpose is to govern America. I hope this video gave some insight into what it's actually like at these universities. I'll eventually release the full uncut hours-long recordings, but in the meantime, please make sure to like, follow, and hit the bell next to my name so you're always up to date with future reports. Thanks, guys.